Imagine a book not written by human hands, not delivered by angels, but carried by the serpent itself. A scroll that predates Eden, brimming with knowledge humanity was never meant to possess. We've always been told Eve was tricked, deceived in the garden. But what if the serpent's role was far more complex, more sinister? What if it brought a forbidden text, a hidden wisdom meant to rival the very voice of God, and initiated Eve into its ancient, dangerous secrets? Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the fall, because the whispers of the serpent's hidden scroll echo even today. The ancient stories speak of secrets never meant to be revealed. Whispers from forgotten sects, fragments in decaying scrolls, and symbols buried beneath centuries of silence. Among these is the tale of a book that predated Eden, a book not meant for human hands. Yet, according to certain hidden traditions, it found its way into the garden. When Eve listened to the serpent, she wasn't merely deceived. She was taught. We often imagine the serpent as a liar, a tempter, a trickster. But what if its role was more profound and more perilous? What if the serpent arrived in Eden bearing forbidden, ancient, and powerful knowledge? Some early mystical sects believed the serpent carried a hidden scroll, a book containing the first teachings of rebellion, not through violence, but through a counterfeit wisdom, an illumination meant to challenge God's authority. In this view, Eve wasn't just tricked, she was initiated. This theory surfaces in texts where the serpent is portrayed not as an enemy, but as a bringer of knowledge, a light-bearer cast in a dark role by history's victors. These writings claim that before God uttered, "Let there be light," the serpent already possessed words, not divine commands, but cosmic secrets. When creation began, these words were forbidden. But the serpent kept them sealed, offering that forbidden book to humanity when the time was right. Genesis tells us the serpent was more cunning than all other beasts. But what if that cunning originated from something deeper? A book it was never supposed to carry, written before the world was even ordered. Ancient teachers hinted at a reason the serpent could speak. It had read something, seen something before time, remembering what even angels had forgotten. In certain traditions, the serpent isn't a fallen creature, but a guardian of hidden truth. They believed the scroll it carried wasn't written with ink but inscribed with thought, encoded in symbols only the spiritually awakened could interpret. It didn't contain laws or commands. It contained questions. Questions designed to dismantle obedience, to turn the soul inward, to plant the seed of a knowledge that didn't need God to flourish. This is why, according to some apocryphal teachings, Eve's interaction with the serpent wasn't just temptation. It was the first reading of the forbidden scroll. The phrase, "Did God really say?" wasn't a lie, but the opening line of a deeper revelation, a challenge to divine authority, veiled as a gentle question. The serpent didn't force Eve. It initiated her. In that moment, her eyes were open not just to good and evil, but to a different kind of knowledge, one that existed before Genesis began. This perspective explains why early religious authorities deemed these writings heretical. They didn't merely accuse the serpent of evil. They accused it of teaching. And that changed everything. Because if the serpent taught, it implied that knowledge could originate outside the will of God. It suggested the fall wasn't an accident, but an encounter with another voice, another doctrine, one that began long before Eden and still echoes in secret. But what did this book contain? What kind of message could shift creation, darken Eden, and set humanity on a path of exile? Some say it spoke of freedom without obedience, power without submission, and a light that doesn't come from heaven, but from within. It taught that the Creator wasn't the sole source of wisdom, and that true divinity could be discovered through self-awakening. If the serpent taught, the fall wasn't an accident but an encounter with an alternate source of truth. And that kind of truth was dangerous, not because it was entirely false, but because it was a twisted truth, half-light wrapped in mystery, a wisdom that displaced God from the center and put the self in his place. The hidden book of the serpent wasn't a collection of lies. It was a mirror, and when Eve read it, she saw something no human was meant to see. This idea terrified the early guardians of religious orthodoxy. They feared that if people believed the serpent possessed wisdom, they would begin to question everything, even the very origins of Scripture. And some did. The groups that embraced these teachings were hunted, scattered, and ultimately erased. but fragments of their beliefs remain in dusty manuscripts, in whispers across forbidden texts, in symbols carved into stone by hands long turned to dust. In these remnants, the serpent's book is hinted at repeatedly. Some believe the scroll had no beginning and no end, no author, only transmission. It passed from voice to voice, realm to realm, until it reached the garden. And the serpent, once a celestial guardian now bound to crawl, was its last bearer, not out of loyalty, but out of consequence. It had spoken what should not have been spoken. Ancient prophecies describe a time when a powerful entity rises with profound wisdom. Some interpret this not as a literal creature, but as a resurfacing of forbidden knowledge, not brute force, but the return of the serpent scroll. The same questions wrapped in new language, the same temptation. You can be like God. Once that seed was planted, it never truly left. Some early writings even claim the scroll still exists, not in physical form, but as a spiritual residue hidden in the subconscious layers of humanity. Every ideology that seeks to replace God with the self, every system that elevates human wisdom above divine revelation, every whisper that says you don't need divine guidance, is said to be a distant echo of that ancient book. The serpent's teachings are scattered through the world like seeds. According to forbidden texts, the scroll taught three core ideas: doubt as the path to freedom, desire as the path to fulfillment, and self-deification as the path to transcendence. It twisted the image of God within humanity, suggesting they already possessed all they needed and that the Creator was holding them back. This is why the serpent said, God knows that when you eat of it, you will be like him. It wasn't just temptation. It was initiation into a rival doctrine, one in which humanity becomes its own light. The scroll didn't tell Eve to disobey. It told her to see herself as worthy of deciding what was good and evil, to become judge, interpreter, and lawgiver. Promised freedom but birthed separation. Yet that scroll never claimed to be evil. In its own way, it promised illumination. It promised that humanity could evolve, ascend, awaken. But what it never said is that light without divine connection becomes a curse. Knowledge without truth becomes a lie. And freedom without obedience becomes bondage. The serpent's book was seductive, but it came with a price: exile. Eve and Adam didn't just disobey. They aligned with another voice. And that voice carried the weight of an ancient teaching, a knowledge that had already led others astray long before Eden. The serpent didn't invent rebellion. It passed it on. It offered what had once tempted even celestial beings, a path apart from the will of the Creator. This is why many believe the serpent was more than just a talking animal. It may have been the final form of a fallen entity, one that had once walked among the stars with knowledge not meant for Earth. Its wings were gone, its form degraded, but its mind was still sharp, and the scroll it carried, though forbidden, was still open to those who would listen. Ancient texts speak of beings who descended to teach forbidden knowledge: how to make weapons, how to enchant, how to manipulate creation. These beings were punished for revealing what should have remained sealed. But what if the serpent was one of them? Or worse, what if it had learned from them, carrying their teachings into Eden, disguised as a question? This would mean the scroll was not of Earth, but of a higher rebellion, passed down in secret. And what if that scroll, that book of twisted wisdom, never truly vanished? What if it still influences thinkers, philosophers, even theologians who deny the absolute authority of the divine, not as a literal manuscript, but as an idea embedded deep within fallen reason? The belief that humanity can define its own truth, that knowledge is liberation, that divine guidance is optional. The danger of the serpent's scroll isn't its boldness but its subtlety. It doesn't shout rebellion. It whispers autonomy. It doesn't deny God outright. It simply suggests that you don't need him anymore. And that's why it's more dangerous than open evil, because it looks like wisdom, but it leads to ruin. Even today, echoes of this teaching are everywhere. In movements that glorify the self, in ideologies that erase moral absolutes, in interpretations that twist sacred texts to fit human desires. Each time, the serpent's voice returns, not as a hiss, but as a philosophy. This is why divine truth brought salvation. It was not relative, not evolving, but eternal. Its words weren't just answers. They were a correction to the ancient lie, where the scroll of the serpent said, "You can be like God." Divine truth declared, "Apart from me, you can do nothing." Two doctrines, two voices, two destinies. Early believers fought not just against persecution but against the revival of the serpent's wisdom. Mystics and others offered secret knowledge, inner light, private revelation. But behind every new truth was the same old lie, that the divine was not enough, that humanity could rise without it, that the scroll in Eden was the true path. But the early teachers recognized that spirit. They warned of another gospel, one that seemed right but led to destruction. They spoke of a spirit that not only denied truth but sought to replace it. And they cautioned that in the last days, many would follow cleverly devised myths. All of them were fighting the same force. The teachings of the serpent scroll reborn in new language, new robes, new names. But the root was always the same. And what's most chilling is this: the serpent never denied divine existence. It acknowledged it. It simply reframed it not as father, but as limiter. Not as life-giver, but as gatekeeper. The scroll didn't deny Eden. It sought to redefine it. That's why so many are still falling today, not into darkness, but into distorted light. They chase wisdom that feels right. They follow teachings that flatter the mind but starve the spirit. And slowly, without realizing it, they walk the same path as Eve, not toward life, but toward the scroll in the serpent's mouth. They believe they're being enlightened, but the serpent's book can't lead to life. It leads to endless questions without answers, to knowledge without truth, to identity without purpose. It promises eyes opened, but delivers hearts hardened. Because once you embrace its doctrine, you no longer see the divine as father, only as a threat. Some believe the final battle won't be fought with armies or weapons, but with books, with scrolls, with ideas. The scroll of light versus the scroll of the serpent. One sealed until the appointed time, the other open since Eden, whispered from age to age. In ancient visions, one weeps because no one is worthy to open the true scroll. Why? Because the true scroll, the one written by the divine, can only be opened by the Word made flesh, not by curiosity, not by ambition, and certainly not by the serpent, only by the sacrificed. This contrast is everything. One scroll brings judgment and life. The other brings awakening and death. One is sealed until the end. The other has been opened since the beginning but never belonged to us. And the question every soul must answer is, which scroll are you reading from? Because even now, the serpent still speaks not in a tree, but in ideas. Not in Eden, but in culture, philosophy, self-help, and pride. And the book it carries may look ancient, but it still opens hearts the same way it opened Eve's. By asking, "Did the divine really say?" and waiting for you to answer. But now you know the truth. The serpent was not just a deceiver. It was a messenger of an older rebellion. And the scroll it carried was not forgotten. It was disguised, passed through philosophies, religions, and even teachings that no longer tremble before the voice of the divine. And those who read it may never realize they've picked up the wrong book. But there is another scroll, one sealed by heaven, one opened only by the one who conquered the serpent, not by argument but by sacrifice. That scroll does not flatter the ego. It breaks it. It does not teach self-exaltation. It teaches surrender. And it leads not to exile but to life. This is the war hidden behind the ancient narrative. Not just between good and evil, but between two revelations. One that begins with "You can be like God," and one that ends with "You are mine." The serpent's book leads to endless seeking, but the true scroll leads to final peace. So, the next time you hear a voice offering secret wisdom, hidden truth, or forbidden light, ask yourself, is this the voice of the one who created me, or the one who tried to unmake Eden? Because the scroll of the serpent still speaks. But only one book was written by the hand of the divine, and only one word can silence the lie. If this revelation opened your eyes, consider exploring more such ancient mysteries. Your engagement helps us continue to uncover truths buried since Eden.